Welcome back, fellow travelers of consciousness and creators of tomorrow. Find yourself a comfortable space, let your shoulders drop, and allow your breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Whether you're listening from a quiet corner of your home, walking through nature's gentle embrace, or stealing a peaceful moment in your busy day, you're exactly where you need to be right now. I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this time exploring one of the most profound mysteries that touches every creative soul. The strange, almost mystical force that keeps our greatest works trapped in the shadows of almost ready. Today, we're going to gently unfold a truth that lives at the intersection of quantum physics and human creativity, where science meets the deepest chambers of the creative heart. Take a breath with me. Feel the weight of all those unfinished projects, those ideas that sparkle in your mind but somehow never quite make it into the world. Feel the familiar ache of the masterpiece that exists only in potential, the book that's been almost done for months, the business idea that's been refined into paralysis, the art that remains perfect only because it remains hidden. There's something beautiful and tragic about the perfectionist's journey. You are the gardener who tends to seeds with such devoted care that they never break through the soil to see sunlight. You are the sculptor who polishes the marble so meticulously that the statue disappears beneath your touch. And perhaps most mysteriously of all, you are the quantum observer whose very act of observation might be collapsing the infinite possibilities of your creation into something smaller than it was meant to be. But here's what I want you to know. And please let this settle gently into your awareness. You are not broken. Your desire for excellence is not a flaw to be fixed. The tender care you bring to your work is a gift, even when it feels like a curse. What we're exploring together today is not about abandoning your standards or rushing carelessly into the world. Instead, we're going to discover how the very laws that govern the quantum universe can become your allies in the sacred act of bringing your creations to life. In the quantum realm, particles exist in states of infinite possibility until the moment they're observed. Scientists call this superposition, the mysterious ability of quantum systems to hold all potential outcomes simultaneously until measurement collapses them into a single reality. What if I told you that your creative work exists in a similar state of superposition, holding infinite potential until the moment you decide it's ready for the world? But here's where the mystery deepens, where science meets the unexplainable poetry of creation. In quantum mechanics, there's a phenomenon called decoherence, the process by which quantum systems lose their mysterious, multi-state nature and become classical, definite, real. It's not violent or destructive. It's actually how possibility becomes actuality, how the dance of potential settles into the solid ground of existence. Your creative work is begging for its own decoherence moment. It's yearning to collapse from the infinite, weightless realm of could-be perfect into the beautiful, imperfect, gloriously real state of is. And the most profound truth we'll explore together is this. The moment you allow your work to decohere, to ship, to launch, to be born into imperfection, you don't destroy its potential. You liberate it. This isn't just productivity advice wrapped in scientific metaphor. This is about understanding a fundamental principle that governs how ideas become reality, how dreams take form, how the invisible becomes visible. We're going to explore why the very act of perfecting your work might be preventing it from achieving its true purpose, and how the quantum principle of controlled decoherence can become your pathway to not just completion, but to a kind of creative evolution you've never experienced before. Throughout our journey today, we'll witness how the perfectionist's dilemma mirrors some of the most mind-bending discoveries in modern physics. We'll see how your creative process operates according to the same mysterious laws that govern the birth of stars and the dance of electrons. And most importantly, we'll discover practical, gentle ways to work with these forces rather than against them. I invite you to listen with both your analytical mind and your creative heart. Don't worry about remembering every detail or taking notes unless that brings you joy. Instead, allow these ideas to wash over you like water, knowing that what you need to hear will find its way into your understanding naturally. Trust that your creative wisdom already knows these truths. We're simply creating space for them to surface. We'll explore the paradox of infinite polishing, where every attempt to improve your work actually moves you further from completion. We'll investigate the illusion of launch readiness and discover who or what really controls your internal go button. We'll examine how perfectionism spreads through your creative process like a benevolent virus. And we'll learn to recognize the early warning signs before they paralyze your progress. Most fascinatingly, we'll uncover the quantum mechanics of creative work itself. How the act of observing and analyzing your own creation might be collapsing its potential in ways you never imagined. We'll discover why shipped work evolves while perfect work fossilizes, and we'll explore the mysterious feedback loops that govern creative iteration. This journey isn't about forcing yourself to ship before you're ready or abandoning the care that makes your work special. It's about developing a new relationship with readiness itself, learning to recognize the difference between productive refinement and creative paralysis, and ultimately discovering how to surf the wave of quantum decoherence rather than fighting against it. So settle in, take another gentle breath, and prepare to see your creative process through entirely new eyes. What we're about to explore together has the potential to transform not just how you complete your projects, but how you understand the very nature of creativity itself. Let's begin this beautiful, mysterious journey into the quantum heart of creation. Why does every last tweak create two more? What if the closer you get to perfect, the further away you actually become? Picture the artist who has been working on the same painting for 3 years. Each morning she approaches the canvas with fresh eyes and notices something that could be improved. A shadow that needs deepening, a highlight that requires softening, a color relationship that feels almost but not quite right. She makes the adjustment with careful precision, steps back, and suddenly sees 2 new problems that weren't there before. The improvement has created new imperfections, and the imperfections demand new improvements. She is caught in a loop that mathematicians might recognize as infinite regression, but which feels to her like a form of creative purgatory. This is the paradox of infinite polishing, and it operates according to principles that are both more common and more mysterious than most creators realize. Every time you make an adjustment to your work, you're not simply improving one element in isolation. You are shifting the entire ecosystem of your creation, altering relationships between components in ways that ripple outward like waves in a pond. What appears to be progress toward perfection is actually movement through an infinite landscape of possible configurations, where each step forward reveals new horizons of potential improvement. The mathematics of this phenomenon are both elegant and terrifying. In systems theory, we learn that complex networks exhibit emergent properties, characteristics that arise from the interactions between components rather than from the components themselves. Your creative work is precisely such a complex network. When you adjust one element, you alter its relationship to every other element, creating new emergent properties that you couldn't have predicted or planned for. These new properties become new targets for refinement, and the cycle begins anew. But there's something even more profound happening beneath the surface of this polishing paradox. Each improvement you make is an act of selection. You are choosing one possibility from among many, collapsing the quantum superposition of your work's potential into a more specific state. In theory, this should bring you closer to completion. But here's where the paradox reveals its true nature. Every act of selection also reveals new possibilities you hadn't previously considered. Consider the writer who has been perfecting the opening paragraph of her novel for 6 months. She began with a simple, clear sentence that effectively introduced her protagonist and setting. But as she refined the language, she discovered she could add layers of meaning through careful word choice. The word choice led to rhythm considerations. The rhythm led to sound patterns. The sound patterns revealed metaphorical possibilities. Each layer of improvement opened up new dimensions of potential refinement, until what began as a single sentence became a multidimensional puzzle with infinite solutions. This is not a failure of the creative process. This is the creative process revealing its true nature as a fractal system, one where each level of magnification reveals new complexity rather than clearer resolution. The closer you look at any element of your work, the more you see opportunities for refinement. The more you refine, the more complex the relationships between elements become. The more complex the relationships, the more opportunities for further refinement emerge. The perfectionist encounters this fractal nature of creative work and makes a fundamental misinterpretation. They believe that if they just keep polishing, they will eventually reach a point where no further improvements are possible, a state of objective completion. But fractal systems don't work this way. In a fractal system, there is no maximum resolution. There is no point at which further magnification reveals no new detail. Every level of investigation opens up new levels of possibility. This creates what we might call the perfectionist's dilemma. The very skills that make you capable of creating excellent work also make you capable of seeing infinite ways that work could be improved. Your sensitivity to quality becomes a trap, because quality in complex systems is not a destination, but a direction. Not a place you arrive at, but a trajectory you follow. The more skilled you become at recognizing quality, the more acutely you perceive the gap between what is and what could be. But here's where the plot thickens, where the scientific meets the mystical. Recent research in cognitive science suggests that the act of repeatedly examining and adjusting your own work actually changes your perception of it in systematic ways. This phenomenon, known as semantic satiation, causes words to lose their meaning when repeated too many times. But there's a parallel process in creative work that we might call aesthetic satiation, the way that continued examination of your own creation gradually erodes your ability to perceive its actual qualities. The musician who has listened to her song 1,000 times during the mixing process can no longer hear it the way a fresh listener would. The filmmaker who has watched his scene in dozens of different cuts loses connection to its emotional impact. The entrepreneur who has refined her pitch deck through countless iterations begins to doubt whether it makes sense to anyone else. This is not paranoia or neurosis. This is a predictable, cognitive response to overexposure to your own work. The cruel irony is that this aesthetic satiation often kicks in just as your work is reaching a level of genuine readiness for the world. The point at which you've polished your creation to a professional standard is precisely the point at which your ability to accurately judge its quality begins to deteriorate. You enter a hall of mirrors where your own repeated observations distort your perception, making flaws appear larger and strengths disappear entirely. This distortion is compounded by what psychologists call the curse of knowledge, the cognitive bias that makes it difficult to imagine what it's like not to know something you know. As you become more intimately familiar with your work through endless revision, you lose the ability to experience it the way your intended audience will. You know too much about the behind-the-scenes decisions, the alternatives you rejected, the compromises you made. This insider knowledge makes it impossible to judge whether your work successfully communicates to someone. Approaching it fresh, the perfectionist becomes trapped in a feedback loop between fractal complexity and perceptual distortion. The work reveals infinite opportunities for improvement precisely when their ability to judge the necessity or effectiveness of those improvements is most compromised. They are like a photographer trying to focus a camera by looking through a lens that becomes more blurred the longer they stare through it. Understanding this paradox doesn't immediately solve it, but it does offer a form of liberation through recognition. The endless cycle of improvement and new imperfection is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're working with a complex system that behaves according to predictable principles. The blurring of your perception through over-examination is not a personal failing. It's a normal cognitive response that affects everyone who engages deeply with their own work. The question then becomes, if infinite improvement is possible and accurate self-judgment becomes impossible, how do you know when to stop polishing? How do you escape the fractal maze of endless refinement? The answer lies not in finding the perfect stopping point, but in recognizing that the stopping point itself must be imposed from outside the system of improvement. It cannot emerge naturally from within the polishing process, because the polishing process is designed to continue indefinitely. This recognition points toward a radical shift in how we think about completion. Instead of viewing completion as the natural endpoint of the refinement process, we must understand it as an artificial boundary imposed on an otherwise infinite system. Completion is not discovered, it is declared. It is not achieved, it is chosen. And this choice cannot be based on the work having reached some objective state of perfection, because such a state does not exist in complex creative systems. Next, we will explore the illusion of launch readiness and discover who or what really controls your internal launch button. Now that you understand how polishing creates its own endless maze, we must confront an even more disturbing question about the nature of readiness itself. If you can never trust your own sense of readiness, who or what is really in charge of your launch button? Now that you see the mirage of endless polishing, who decides when the race begins? There exists within every creator a mysterious entity that operates like a gatekeeper at the threshold between creation and release. This entity whispers constantly about readiness, about timing, about whether the work has achieved some invisible standard that qualifies it for existence in the world. The perfectionist believes this voice represents their professional judgment, their artistic integrity, their commitment to quality. But what if this voice is actually something else entirely? A phantom authority that has no legitimate claim to the power it wields. Consider the entrepreneur who has been almost ready to launch her online course for 8 months. She has recorded the videos, designed the materials, built the website, and created the marketing campaigns. By any objective measure, she has completed more work than many successful course creators ever do. Yet every morning the gatekeeper voice presents a new requirement for readiness. The audio quality could be better. The workbooks need more examples. The pricing strategy requires further research. The social media presence needs strengthening. Each requirement seems reasonable in isolation, but together they form an infinite queue of prerequisites that can never be fully satisfied. This phenomenon reveals something unsettling about the nature of readiness itself. We treat readiness as if it were an objective quality that our work either possesses or lacks, like temperature or weight. But readiness is actually a subjective judgment made by an internal authority whose credentials we rarely question. This authority operates according to criteria that are often contradictory, impossible to fulfill, or completely irrelevant to the work's actual purpose or potential impact. The gatekeeper voice derives its apparent legitimacy from its intimate knowledge of your work's flaws and limitations. It can point to specific problems with surgical precision. This section is unclear, that transition feels abrupt. This argument needs more support. But here's the crucial insight. The gatekeeper's ability to identify problems does not qualify it to determine readiness. Problem identification and readiness assessment are entirely different cognitive functions, yet we unconsciously treat them as the same thing. Every piece of work contains problems. Every creation harbors imperfections. Every project could benefit from additional time, resources, or attention. The gatekeeper voice takes these universal truths and weaponizes them against completion, suggesting that the presence of any solvable problem invalidates readiness. This is like saying that because a house has doors and windows that could theoretically be improved, the house is uninhabitable. The logic appears sound until you realize that it would render every human creation permanently unready for use. But the gatekeeper's power goes beyond simple problem identification. It also controls the definition of enough, perhaps the most slippery concept in the creator's vocabulary. Enough quality, enough value, enough polish, enough preparation. The gatekeeper presents itself as the guardian of standards, but its standards have a peculiar quality. They escalate automatically as your work improves. The moment your work meets one level of enough, the gatekeeper reveals a higher level that was supposedly always the real requirement. This automatic escalation creates what we might call the readiness mirage, the phenomenon where completion appears to be just one more improvement away always. The mirage maintains its compelling power precisely because it contains enough truth to seem credible. Your work usually can be improved with one more revision. That improvement usually would make it better. But the mirage conceals the fact that this will remain true no matter how many revisions you complete. There will always be one more improvement that would make your work better, just as there will always be one more mile when you're chasing the horizon. The gatekeeper voice also employs a sophisticated form of temporal manipulation. It projects your work into hypothetical future scenarios where its current imperfections will be exposed and criticized. What will people think when they see this? Becomes the question that drives endless revision. But this question is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how people actually encounter and evaluate creative work. The gatekeeper assumes that your audience will examine your work with the same microscopic attention and intimate knowledge that you possess. It imagines critics who will spot every shortcut, notice every compromise, and judge you accordingly. In reality, your audience approaches your work from a completely different position. They lack your insider knowledge of what could have been different. They don't know about the options you rejected or the improvements you considered but didn't implement. They encounter your work as a complete artifact, judging it based on whether it serves their needs or interests them, not based on whether it meets some abstract standard of perfection. The gatekeeper voice makes you optimize for an imaginary audience of perfectionist critics rather than for the real audience who will actually benefit from your work. This projection of perfectionist judgment onto your audience reveals something deeper about the gatekeeper's true nature. It is not actually concerned with serving your audience or achieving your creative goals. Its primary function is self-preservation, maintaining its own authority and importance in your creative process. If you were to release work that succeeded despite being imperfect, the gatekeeper's warnings would be revealed as unnecessary. Its power depends on your continued belief that its caution is protecting you from disaster. The gatekeeper also exploits your relationship with time in manipulative ways. It suggests that waiting a little longer will result in significantly better work, but it never provides concrete metrics for measuring this improvement or definitive timelines for achieving it. Just give it another week becomes just another month, becomes just until next season, becomes just until next year. The gatekeeper is a master of the false economy of time, convincing you that additional time invested will yield proportional returns, when the actual returns diminish rapidly after a certain point. This temporal manipulation is particularly insidious because it makes you complicit in your own delay. You're not procrastinating or being lazy, you're being responsible, thoughtful, professional. The gatekeeper transforms delay into a virtue, making you feel good about not launching, while simultaneously making you feel guilty about the possibility of launching. It's a psychological double-bind that keeps you paralyzed while feeling productive. But perhaps the gatekeeper's most sophisticated trick is its ability to co-opt your genuine care for your work and transform it into a weapon against completion. Your desire to create something meaningful becomes evidence that your current work is not yet meaningful enough. Your commitment to quality becomes proof that your current quality standards are insufficient. Your respect for your audience becomes a reason to assume they deserve better than what you've created. The gatekeeper takes your highest creative values and uses them to argue against the very act of creation. This co-optation is particularly cruel because it makes your creative paralysis feel noble rather than dysfunctional. You're not stuck, you're discerning. You're not afraid, you're thorough. You're not procrastinating, you're preparing. The gatekeeper provides a narrative framework that transforms creative paralysis into creative virtue, making it nearly impossible to recognize the problem, let alone solve it. The most disturbing aspect of the gatekeeper phenomenon is how rarely we question its authority. We debate its specific judgments, whether this particular improvement is necessary, whether that particular timeline is reasonable. But we rarely ask whether it should have veto power over our creative expression at all. We treat it as if it were an elected official rather than recognizing it as a self-appointed dictator that has seized control of our creative process without our conscious consent. Breaking free from the gatekeeper is control requires recognizing that readiness is not a quality your work possesses but a decision you make. The gatekeeper wants you to believe that readiness will announce itself through some unmistakable signal, a feeling of satisfaction, an absence of obvious problems, a sense of completion. But these signals never come, because they're not supposed to come. The gatekeeper's job is to prevent launch, not to facilitate it. The decision to launch must come from a different part of yourself, the part that created the work in the first place, the part that had something to express or contribute or share. This part of yourself understood from the beginning that the work would be imperfect, that it would be criticized, that it could always be better. It created the work anyway, because it had something more important than perfection to offer: utility. Beauty, connection, insight, entertainment, service. Reclaiming your launch authority from the gatekeeper doesn't mean becoming reckless or abandoning quality standards. It means recognizing that the gatekeeper's standards are not quality standards at all. They are delay mechanisms disguised as quality standards. Real quality standards are specific, measurable, and achievable. They provide clear criteria for completion rather than infinite reasons for delay. They serve your work's purpose rather than undermining it. Next, we will explore how perfectionism spreads through your creative process like a virus, infecting each element with doubt and hesitation. Now that you understand how the gatekeeper maintains control through false authority, you must see how its influence contaminates every aspect of your creative confidence. If perfectionism is a mental virus, why does every improvement infect your confidence to finish? What if progress itself makes you sicker? Deep within the architecture of perfectionist thinking lies a mechanism so subtle and insidious that most creators never recognize its operation. This mechanism functions like a virus, not destroying its host outright, but hijacking the host's natural processes to replicate itself and spread throughout the entire creative system. Every improvement you make to your work becomes a vector for transmitting perfectionist doubt to previously healthy elements of your project. Every solution creates new problems. Every answer spawns new questions. Progress itself becomes the delivery system for creative paralysis. The virus begins its infection cycle when you achieve something genuinely good in your work. Perhaps you craft a particularly elegant paragraph, design a beautiful visual element, or solve a complex technical challenge with surprising grace. In that moment of achievement, you experience what should be pure satisfaction: the joy of creation, the pride of problem solving, the pleasure of artistic expression. But the virus immediately hijacks this positive experience and converts it into a weapon against completion. The mechanism is breathtakingly simple. The virus compares your moment of excellence against the rest of your work and whispers, "If you can do this well here, why isn't everything else at this level?" The beautiful paragraph makes the surrounding paragraphs look clumsy by comparison. The elegant design element highlights the ordinary nature of other elements. The brilliant solution makes other solutions appear lazy or rushed. Your own success becomes evidence of your overall failure. This viral logic spreads through your work with mathematical precision. Each improved element doesn't just improve itself, it degrades your perception of everything else through contrast. You find yourself in the bizarre position where making your work better actually makes you feel worse about your work. The virus has achieved its primary objective, transforming progress into regression, achievement into inadequacy, success into failure. The infection spreads along multiple pathways simultaneously. There's the horizontal spread, where improvements in one area create pressure for comparable improvements in parallel areas. If you enhance the visual design of your presentation slides, suddenly the content quality seems insufficient by comparison. If you refine the argument structure of your essay, the prose style appears amateurish. The virus ensures that excellence in any single dimension becomes a criticism of every other dimension. Then there's the vertical spread, where surface improvements reveal deeper structural issues that had previously been invisible. When you polish the language of your marketing copy, you suddenly notice that the underlying positioning strategy is unclear. When you refine the user interface of your app, you realize the user experience flow has fundamental problems. Each layer of improvement peels back to reveal another layer that needs attention, creating an archaeological excavation of inadequacy that extends indefinitely downward. Perhaps most devastatingly, there's the temporal spread, where present improvements infect your perception of past and future work. The virus projects current standards backward, making everything you've previously created appear substandard in retrospect. It projects current problems forward, suggesting that every future challenge will be as difficult as current challenges appear to be. You become trapped in an eternal present of inadequacy, where nothing you've done is good enough and nothing you might do seems achievable. The virus's most sophisticated adaptation is its ability to disguise itself as legitimate quality consciousness. The infected creator genuinely believes they're simply maintaining high standards, being thorough, or showing proper respect for their craft. The virus co-opts the vocabulary of professionalism and artistic integrity, making its symptoms appear virtuous rather than pathological. "I just want it to be good," becomes the virus speaking, using your own values as camouflage for its destructive agenda. This camouflage makes the virus nearly impossible to detect through introspection alone. When you examine your perfectionist impulses, they appear entirely reasonable and well-intentioned. Of course, you want your work to be good. Of course, you should fix obvious problems. Of course, you should maintain consistent quality throughout your project. The virus hides behind these reasonable-sounding principles while systematically undermining your ability to act on them effectively. The viral infection also creates what we might call autoimmune responses in your creative system. Your natural instincts for completion and sharing, the healthy mechanisms that drive creative work toward fulfillment, begin to be treated as threats by the virus-infected quality consciousness. The impulse to share your work triggers viral warnings about inadequacy. The desire to move on to new projects activates viral demands for infinite revision. Your healthy creative instincts become suppressed by the viral simulation of quality concern. One of the virus's most cruel adaptations is its ability to learn and evolve with your creative development. As your skills improve and your work genuinely gets better, the virus updates its standards accordingly. It maintains a constant gap between what you can achieve and what it claims you should achieve. The virus ensures that increased competence leads to increased dissatisfaction. The growing skills generate growing self-criticism. That creative development becomes creative torment. The virus also exhibits network effects, spreading beyond individual projects to infect your entire creative identity. If one project is deemed inadequate by viral logic, then perhaps you're inadequate as a creator. If one area of your work needs improvement, then perhaps you need improvement as a person. The virus escalates local quality concerns into global identity crises, transforming specific creative challenges into existential threats to your self-worth. This identity infection creates what we might call meta-perfectionism. Perfectionism about your perfectionism. You become not just concerned about the quality of your work, but concerned about the quality of your quality concerns. Are you being too picky? Are you being picky enough? Are you wasting time on unimportant details? Are you overlooking important details? The virus creates recursive loops of self-doubt that feed on themselves and grow stronger through iteration. The viral infection also manipulates your relationship with feedback and external input. When others praise your work, the virus interprets this as evidence that they haven't looked closely enough to notice the problems you can see. When others criticize your work, the virus presents this as confirmation that your quality concerns were justified. The virus creates a hermetically sealed logical system where all evidence supports its agenda of infinite delay and constant inadequacy. Perhaps most insidiously, the virus corrupts your understanding of the relationship between effort and outcome. It suggests that more effort automatically produces better results, encouraging you to confuse activity with productivity, revision with improvement, and concern with care. The virus makes you believe that time spent worrying about your work is time spent improving your work. That anxiety about quality is evidence of commitment to quality. This effort-outcome confusion leads to what we might call productivity theater, engaging in behaviors that feel like productive work but actually serve the virus's agenda of preventing completion. Endless research, elaborate planning systems, constant tool optimization, and obsessive organization all provide the sensation of progress while ensuring that no actual progress toward completion occurs. The virus is perfectly happy for you to be busy as long as you're not busy shipping. The viral infection reaches its full maturity when it achieves complete regulatory capture of your creative process. At this stage, the virus doesn't just influence your decisions about when to launch. It controls your definitions of what constitutes good work, appropriate standards, and reasonable timelines. You become unable to distinguish between legitimate quality concerns and viral, Quality concerns because the virus has rewritten the operating system of your creative judgment. Breaking free from viral infection requires understanding that perfectionism is not actually about perfection. It's about control. The virus uses quality language to disguise what is fundamentally an anxiety management system. It promises that if you just control every variable, anticipate every criticism, and fix every problem, you will be safe from rejection, failure, and judgment. But this promise is false. The virus offers a security that doesn't exist in exchange for a vitality that does. Recognition of the viral nature of perfectionism allows you to see its symptoms clearly for the first time. The constant escalation of standards, the transformation of progress into inadequacy, the confusion of effort with outcome, the corruption of feedback loops. These are not signs of high standards or professional dedication. These are signs of a system that has been hijacked and repurposed to serve ends that contradict its original function. Next, we will explore the quantum mechanics of creative work itself, discovering how the act of observing your own creation collapses its potential in ways you never imagined. Now that you recognize how the virus spreads and controls your creative system, you must understand the fundamental physics of why watching your work too closely might be the very thing that destroys it. What if observing your own work collapses its potential? Now that you've seen how the virus spreads, what if the act of checking for perfection is the very thing that destroys it? In the deepest laboratories of quantum physics, scientists have discovered something that should terrify every perfectionist creator. The act of observation fundamentally alters the thing being observed. This is not philosophy or metaphor, this is measurable, repeatable scientific fact. Particles exist in states of infinite possibility until the moment they are observed, at which point they collapse into single, definite states. What if your creative work operates according to the same mysterious principles? What if every time you step back to evaluate your creation, you are not just observing it? You are destroying entire universes of potential. The quantum world reveals truths that seem to violate common sense. An electron does not simply exist in one place, it exists in all possible places simultaneously in what physicists call a superposition state. Only when measured does it choose a specific location, collapsing from infinite possibility into singular reality. This collapse is irreversible and instantaneous. Once observed, the electron can never return to its previous state of unlimited potential. Your creative work exists in an analogous state of superposition before you begin the process of critical examination. That unfinished song contains every possible melody, harmony, and rhythm simultaneously. The rough draft of your novel holds all potential character developments, plot resolutions, and thematic revelations at once. Your business idea encompasses every possible market positioning, feature set, and growth trajectory in parallel. This is the magical state of creative superposition, where your work is simultaneously everything it could be. But the moment you begin to critically observe your work, something catastrophic occurs. The act of observation, reading your draft, listening to your demo, testing your prototype, forces your creation to collapse from infinite possibility into specific, limited reality. What was once a symphony of potential becomes a particular arrangement of notes. What was once a universe of narrative possibility becomes a specific sequence of words. What was once unlimited business potential becomes a defined set of features and limitations. This collapse process, which physicists call decoherence, happens whether you want it to or not. It is not something you can prevent through careful observation or gentle analysis. The very act of conscious attention to your work triggers the collapse from potential to actual. And here's the truly disturbing part. Once collapsed, your work can never return to its original state of unlimited possibility. The observation has permanently constrained it to the narrow band of reality that your critical mind was capable of perceiving in that moment. Consider the songwriter who records a rough voice memo of a melody that excites her. In that moment, the melody exists in quantum superposition. It could be developed into a folk ballad, an electronic dance track, a jazz standard, or a classical composition. All these possibilities coexist in the potential space around the core melodic idea. But the moment she sits down to improve it, to figure out what it wants to be, She begins the observation process that will collapse it into one specific form. Her critical attention forces the melody to choose a genre, a tempo, a harmonic structure, a lyrical theme. What was infinite becomes finite. The tragedy deepens when we realize that the specific form into which the work collapses is not necessarily the best possible form. It's simply the form that your observing consciousness was prepared to perceive in that moment of collapse. Your creative work's potential is collapsed by the limitations of your current perspective, knowledge, and emotional state. The brilliant possibilities that existed in superposition but were outside your current frame of awareness simply vanish, never to return. This quantum mechanical understanding explains why so many creators report that their work felt more exciting, more promising, more powerful before they began the process of improving it. They are not remembering incorrectly or romanticizing the past. They are accurately recalling the phenomenological experience of creative superposition, the feeling of being in the presence of unlimited possibility. The improvement process, no matter how skillfully executed, cannot recreate this feeling because it operates through observation, which by definition destroys superposition. The perfectionist creator becomes trapped in a cycle of quantum collapse and disappointment. Each observation session collapses the work into a more specific but less exciting state. The creator observes this reduction in potential and interprets it as evidence that the work needs more improvement. But each additional improvement session requires more observation, which causes more collapse, which reduces more potential, which creates more disappointment. The creator is unknowingly using the very process that reduces potential to try to increase potential. The quantum mechanics of creative work also explains the phenomenon of beginner's luck that many creators experience. When you're new to a medium or genre, your observing consciousness has fewer preconceptions about what the work should become. This allows the collapse process to access a wider range of possibilities, often resulting in work that feels fresh and unexpected. As you develop more expertise and stronger opinions about what constitutes good work, your observing consciousness becomes more constrained, causing future collapses to access a narrower band of possibilities. This creates the cruel irony that developing expertise in your field may actually reduce your ability to create surprising, innovative work. Your increased knowledge and refined taste become a more powerful observation apparatus that collapses your work's potential more quickly and completely. The voice of expertise that you've worked so hard to develop becomes the instrument of your creative limitation. The observation collapse cycle also explains why collaborative work often feels more alive and exciting than solo work. When multiple consciousnesses observe creative work simultaneously, the collapse process becomes more complex and less predictable. Each observer brings different collapse-inducing perspectives, creating interference patterns that can result in more interesting final states. The work might collapse into forms that no single observer would have accessed alone. But perhaps the most profound implication of creative quantum mechanics is the recognition that the moment of release, when you stop observing and allow others to encounter your work, is actually a moment of quantum liberation. When you ship your work, you allow it to enter superposition states in other people's consciousnesses. Your finished song becomes infinite potential songs in the minds of listeners. Your completed novel becomes unlimited story possibilities in the imagination of readers. Your launched product becomes countless problem-solving scenarios in the experience of users. This is the paradox of quantum-controlled decoherence. You must collapse your work's infinite potential in order to give it infinite potential. The act of completion through observation destroys the work's superposition in your consciousness, but enables its superposition in countless other consciousnesses. Your creative work achieves its full potential not by avoiding collapse, but by collapsing strategically and then being released to achieve new superposition states elsewhere. The perfectionist creator fears this release because they interpret it as abandoning the work to an imperfect state. But quantum mechanics reveals that this interpretation is backwards. The perfectionist is actually abandoning the work to a collapsed state by continuing to observe it. Release is not abandonment, release is resurrection. It allows your creation to return to superposition in contexts where it can achieve potentials that were impossible within your collapsed observation framework. Understanding creative quantum mechanics transforms your relationship with the improvement process. Instead of viewing improvement as a way to increase your work's potential, you begin to understand it as a way to guide the collapse process toward more useful collapsed states. The goal is not to maximize potential. That was already maximized in the original superposition state. The goal is to achieve a strategic collapse that serves your creative intentions while preserving enough ambiguity for others to find their own superposition states within your work. This quantum perspective also reveals why deadlines and external constraints can be creatively liberating rather than limiting. Constraints force the collapse process to occur within defined parameters, preventing the endless deferral of collapse that characterizes perfectionist paralysis. A deadline is essentially a measurement apparatus that forces your work's superposition to collapse into whatever state it has achieved by a specific point in time. This may not be the best possible collapsed state, but it is a definite collapsed state that can then achieve superposition in other contexts. The science of quantum decoherence offers a new framework for understanding creative completion. Your work is not failing to reach its potential when you release. It is transitioning from one form of potential, superposition in your consciousness, to another form of potential, superposition in others' consciousness. The act of shipping is not a compromise with imperfection. It is a quantum phase transition from private possibility to public possibility. Next, we will explore why only released work evolves while perfect work fossilizes, discovering how evolution demands mutation and why your perfect ideas are doomed to extinction. Now that you understand how observation collapses potential, you must see how release resurrects it in forms you never imagined possible.